are you liberated? Are you liberated from samsara?
Liberated, do you mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Am I free?
Are you free from samsara, dukkha, like a liberation? I don't know, in Buddhism, they call it liberation or?
Yeah, liberation. Yeah. It's a very challenging question because, no, the answer is no, of course not. I mean, being human, I have no pretense or kind of contrivance around having attained anything. Okay. So, and it's problematic even to claim that because, as soon as you say, yes, I have attained something or other, or I am liberated, the problem isn't the liberation, but the problem is definitely the I, the personal pronoun. So, in the Chan tradition, the teachers lay out traps for the students to see how easily they'll get caught in one trap or another. The biggest trap of all being, of course, the trap of a reified notion of self, of a me at all or an I at all. So the way I would describe, about 50 years of regular practice of meditation in my own life is that I'm probably, if I had not been meditating, I would have been dead a long time ago because of all sorts of karmic, sort of challenges and impulses and so forth. And that I've kind of softened over the years and my heart has expanded more so that I notice how easily I might instinctively fall into liking and disliking, whether it's other people or circumstances or so forth. So there's the noticing that the thoughts and emotions occur in that way. But for the most part, I don't get quite as caught in the narrative and the emotion the way I did when I was much younger. But I don't see that as attainment. I see that as a kind of ongoing arc of learning, growing, healing, and transformation that has no end. That has no beginning either, because from the perspective of Buddha nature, there's no place, as the Heart Sutra says, there is really no place to go, nothing to do, and nothing to attain, because you're already that which you're looking for. And it's ignorance that prevents you from realizing it. And for me, that realizing or that realization means moment by moment living life with that kind of embodied wakefulness. And like everybody else, I just do my best,
Right, yeah. So are you interested to become a liberation and enlightened, fully enlightened? I don't know, whatever that really means, but you are just totally let it go, those concepts long back.
No, of course. No, I'm interested. Of course, we speak, about bhavana or, sort of like what the sort of ongoing essence of meditative practice is bhavana, which the root meaning, as I understand it, from the Sanskrit and the Pali, is development. So I see human beings as on a kind of developmental arc from birth to death, or however your cosmology is, beyond birth, beyond death, but that it's an arc of continual transformation and inquiry and love that is, in some sense, recognizing how easy selfing arises, a kind of nucleation of a kind of particular, unique self narrative that is usually too small for the actuality of who anybody is. So I'm always on the lookout for getting caught in my own narratives. And that's where awareness, so to speak, on a moment-to-moment basis can liberate suffering by liberating narrative. And I believe that, you have a very developed and poetic vocabulary in the Tibetan tradition for like writing on water. The notion of the image of writing on waters. You see what the mind is doing. It's creating a self or a special moment or a narrative. But if you see it as writing on water, in the moment that the writing is happening, it doesn't sustain itself. Okay. So that's, if I understand, my own teachers correctly, that's a moment of self-liberation. It's like right in that moment, you're not creating new karma, so to speak, because it's dissolving as you're doing it. So as you're observing. So from that point of view, I mean, that's mindfulness. That's the practice, is to see how moment by moment by moment, the sort of stream of thinking carries us away from the awareness. But there's no problem with the stream as long as we let awareness to become, as the neuroscientists would say, our default mode. So yeah, there's the stream of thought, but we're not caught in the stream, or when we are, we get out fairly quickly. And that's, again, the kind of writing on water, or the finger touching the soap bubble, and it self-liberates. The awareness, the thought self-liberates with the touch of awareness, so to speak, or the embrace of awareness. So those images that come from the Tibetan traditions, to me, are very, very applicable to Americans and to people who are, coming to meditation for the first time, but not within a meditative tradition, or don't know what they're doing. That many times the doctors just tell them they should do this. They don't know what they're getting into. But it's never about just making people better or feel better or reducing their stress a little bit. It's about liberating the stress, in the sense that, the stress, many current translators, Dharma translators, translate dukkha nowadays as stress.
Okay, that's beautiful. I heard unsatisfaction before.
Yeah, unsatisfactoriness,
stress is
anguish. But there are many different words, because dukkha is like untranslatable.
Of course.
But there are translators now who are translating texts, and they're talking about the First Noble Truth as the actuality of dukkha or stress. That the inevitability of those kinds of challenges, inwardly and outwardly. With any time, we're attached to a particular condition. I mean, the second noble truth, that as soon as we're self-identified, then of course there's suffering.
Right. Yeah. So right now, the Jon Kabat-Zinn who is in front of me, does he have an ego? If he has, what is ego? What kind of ego do you have?
Before we go there, it's funny that you say the Jon Kabat-Zinn that's in front of you, because what's in front of you is just a bunch of pixels on your screen, 6,000 miles away from the pixels on my laptop screen. So even the nature of our conversation is a kind of fabrication, so to speak, that involves extremely sophisticated technology, as if we were face to face, and we actually are face to face across 6,000 miles. So that's totally amazing.
That's true.
So then the question is Jon Kabat-Zinn what?
Have an ego. If you have ego, what kind of ego?
Well, the way I try to respond to this kind of a question is, first of all, the ego is the first person singular of the verb to be in Latin.
Okay.
And Freud was famous for having sort of developed the concept of the ego.
Right.
But it was actually not Freud. It was the problem of translation of Freud from German, because he was German, he was like wrote in German. So when he talked about what we call the ego, he called it das Ich, the I, das Ich. But when the English got a hold of Freud and wanted to translate Freud into English, they didn't use the I. They wanted something sexier. So they, I understand it, so they used the Latin ego, and then developed a whole kind of framework of the ego and the id and all this other stuff that is just a kind of functional model for understanding the nature of mind. So if you're asking me, do I have an ego? Or do you mean, do I use the personal pronoun I? Yes, I certainly do.
Mm-hmm.
But over the years, I've...
The self-grasping. I think when I say ego, like in Buddhism, they use this
self-grasping.
Self-grasping.
Yeah.
Self-identity.
I notice self-grasping at times, probably, but the noticing of it, in some sense, liberates the self-grasping. Or my relationships, because I have a lot of teachers that I live with, like my wife and my grandchildren and my children. So I have all sorts of teachers that can reflect back to me anytime that I'm overdoing the self-grasping, because they'll let me know big time. So that's very beneficial to live in a family where we actually help each other to recognize the ways in which we fall into sometimes pure idiocy or anger or wanting something in particular that actually disregards not just my own true nature, but everybody else's true nature. So that from that point of view, family is a fantastic pot or, cooking pot for nurturing Dharma. Just like a monastery is a fantastic environment for nurturing Dharma. But not everybody in the monastery ultimately truly benefits in a liberative way from being in the monastery, I'm told. That it requires a certain kind of conviction and discipline that is very powerful, not merely going with the thought structure of things, but the liberative transformation beyond thought. Yeah. So the family is a wonderful environment for having reality reflected back to you, and especially your own, grasping and clinging, aversion and greed, hatred and aversion. I mean, it's like all life is like that, but as soon as you are instructed, so to speak, in the basics, so that you see it, you can recognize it, then you can self-liberate moment by moment by moment. That's by simply applying mindfulness in that moment, rather than taking it personally. You take everything personally, and then you build the big story of what I like, what I don't like. There was a beautiful example of that. I don't know if you heard about it, but in the Academy Awards in Hollywood the other night, one famous movie star went up on stage and socked the person who was actually giving a presentation because he was insulted by what he said, what the comedian who was on stage said about his wife. So he took it personally. Now, we all do that all the time. We take things personally. And then in front of like an audience of millions, he went up and, basically fell into violence around a self-narrative about him, his wife, what was... If you don't take it personally, see, this would have been a beautiful, like, Dharma opportunity to not take something personally that really was meant with good humor and not to be really aggressive or harmful. Then you're already liberated in that moment. You don't take it personally, then you have 1,000 different skillful responses. If you take it personally, anger arises, then violence arises, and the whole world got to see this. big time. It was quite an interesting teaching. And then, of course, later he apologized for it because he realized this was not right action. But at the moment, you lose your mind at the time that you most need your mind. And then, you can do very, very stupid things. Now, this was just like no real harm done. But, we do this. I mean, look at what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. One wrong view and you're killing thousands and thousands of women and children and babies and destroying an unbelievable amount of, a country because of thoughts.
Exactly.
So if it wasn't so tragic, it would actually be funny, but it's not funny at all. And this is where I think the real importance of liberative awareness comes in nowadays in the world, is that it's not just for the sake of oneself in terms of like the bodhisattva ideal is, of course, that you put off, in some sense, your own ultimate liberation, as I understand it, until every other being on the planet, or maybe all beings on all planets, have moved with, skillful help in that direction. So that's true selflessness, is not even wanting, some kind of ultimate experience for oneself, whatever it is. And in my view, for what it is, for what it's worth, that is like an incredible expression of wisdom and compassion, to no longer care. But that's kind of a way of caring in the deepest of ways, that you're trusting that you're good enough for now. You don't have to become a bodhisattva or a Buddha. You're good enough for now. And it turns out the reason you're good enough for now is because you basically already are a Buddha. So again, you don't need to become one. Is this making any sense to you from your point of view? I hope it's not heresy.
No, it is making sense. I think you said this beautifully. You have this self-grasping, and you said that, but moment that you're aware and you notice that it's self-grasping and you're liberating. So if I understand correctly, as you said, like you have the self-grasping, or you call it ego or whatever, but it is there, but it is not there at the same time. It just
exactly. It self-liberates. Yeah, moment by moment by moment. If you are attending, in other words, if you are awake moment by moment by moment, but if you fall asleep or you fall into these half awake, half asleep states. So you often go around our whole lives half awake, half asleep. Then, of course, you're completely subject to being caught.
Of course.
And that kind of thing.
You said that family is the best teacher or best. I'm now 3 decades in monastery, and since 1980, I think 9. With the 16 Karmapa monastery there. So we grew up with all the, I think 30 or other Rinpoches were there, now they're all grown up teaching.
Yeah.
First I was the smallest one, 5 years old.
Yeah.
So now after 3 decades, I'm planning to have a family. So what do you advise for me now? Who is just
find the right person, find the right karmic person to marry. Karmically
found, yeah.
Okay. If the karma is good, everything else will follow.
Right, yeah.
And then, the way I looked at children is I saw them as live-in Zen masters.
Okay.
That they were like, they got to parachute into our lives. And then if we paid attention to what they were needing, asking of us, how they were being. And we approached it selflessly and with what one of my Zen teachers called don't know mind, just like openness, that they would actually, they're like little live-in Dharma teachers who teach you everything you need to know. And at the same time, we nurture them in ways that will keep their pure Buddha nature alive, as opposed to squelched by unmindful parents who often insist that their children live up to their expectations as opposed to not knowing who these little Buddhas are, but let them find their own way in the world within a very kind of loving environment that the parents and the larger community hold them in. Now, that's easy to say, but it turns out that's very, very challenging on a moment-to-moment level.
Yeah, for us in a monastery for 3 decades, let's say, I mean, somehow 2 decades I was really strictly there, but 1 decade I was just wondering. But for 2 decades, they brainwashed, they say like a family, it's the real samsara begin, the real dukkha will begin. So I'm quite exciting at the same time, quite nervous at the same time.
Yeah.
Like kind of now the real samsara begin.
It's a great adventure. I tell you, my wife and I wrote a book about it together called Everyday Blessings, The Inner Work of Mindful Parenting, because we really felt like this was an incredible meditative practice to actually intentionally bring children into the world. And this world is a very scary world. And now even more so than when our children were born, which was like 40 years ago, about. Now, a lot of people are questioning what's going to happen to the human race if we don't take care of issues like global warming. So mindfulness of the planet, mindfulness of, what we've done to weather patterns and the glaciers and the polar ice caps. And this is mindfulness practice at the sort of big level. But in the level of the family, it's like, okay, if we have these children, they really are Buddhas. How do we hold them in such a way that their Buddha nature will not be squelched or will not be locked away, that will take 20, 30 years of psychotherapy to help them unlock it, but to not to recognize it from the very beginning. And then to learn. It's an ongoing learning process. There's no book that will tell you how best to parent your children. I mean, this is the book. The heart is the only book. And in relationship, if you're in a relationship with a woman or a co-parent or however the family is structured, to really be in tune around the core assumptions and the core intentions around engaging in parenting, because it's a lifetime's engagement. I mean, even when the children are in their 30s or 40s, if you're still alive, you're still their parent. It's just like, it's a marvelous adventure, and also very challenging. It is very challenging, and also nothing better.
Right, yeah. Let's see.
So congratulations to you for even wanting to go in that direction. I think that, it's a big adventure. And and I don't know if you know my friend and colleague, Thupten Jinpa.
Oh, yeah.
But, he was very much a monk in, I think, a Nyingma tradition, I believe. But, a monk.
Geluk.
Was he Geluk?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but at a certain point, he actually disrobed and, married, and now has a family and like older daughters now. But I remember when he did that, and it was like, it was a big undertaking for him, but it was like colossal. And he had His Holiness's blessing to do it, and it's like, I think as long as you look at life as an adventure and as a Dharma adventure, then the forms don't matter. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form, as long as we're not caught, then the forms don't matter. And different people have different kinds of karma and at different stages of their lives too. So again, welcome to the club.
Welcome to the club. Thank you. If you are dying right now, or let's say, how will you going to deal with your death or dying? Like, let's say you are right now, like a last exhaling. Do you think there will be fear in you, or you will just rest in mindfulness? How you will, let's say it's happening right now, just happening right now, the last breath exhaling. What do you think? How would you going to deal with it?
Well, I practice this way, that, like, there's a very real way in which every out-breath is a little mini death.
That's true.
Because we don't know that the breath will come in, the next breath will come in. Someday, as you're saying, the next breath will not come in.
Yeah.
The breath will go out. I held my father in my arms while he was dying. And of course, his breath was very challenging in many ways. I mean, it was very noisy and it was very labored. So I could really feel it in my body and my holding him, as well as just hearing it. And then it was gone. So there's a certain way in which I feel like every out-breath is a kind of mini death. And it's a little bit of a kind of reminder, if not a preparation, for that moment where there will be that last out-breath whenever, however it comes, and there will not be another in-breath. I'm also very aware that at the same time that I'm not dead yet. And so the number of moments that I have between now and that moment when it will be the last out-breath are extremely precious. And I want to make the absolute most use of them in the wisest possible way, not for myself to become a better person or read more books or give more talks or become more, whatever the usual currency is for fame or fortune or recognition, but to be of use while I have the energy to be of some use. Because the world is suffering in ways that it has always suffered, but also in many unique ways because of the arc of human technology and human history in the past. We're not that old. We're only like sort of like 1,500 generations of human history. Mm-hmm. So all of human history is like 1,500 generations or something like that. So that's nothing. Mm-hmm. But if we care about our own lives, but even more our children's lives, our grandchildren's lives, and many generations to come, and for all beings, not just human beings, but not just our own privileged family, but everybody, then for me, the karmic challenge of the moment is how to use whatever moments I have between this moment and my last moment to be of some use in healing the world. Because I feel like human beings are, in some sense, the autoimmune disease of planet Earth. We have changed the climate of planet Earth in 200 years, but that could have consequences for 10,000 years. So if we care about future generations, then we really need to wake up, not just me individually or you individually or meditators, but whether it's meditators or non-meditators, that's a dualism too. I mean, the meditators are not necessarily all great bodhisattvas and selfless. And the non-meditators, sometimes they may put the meditators to shame in how selfless and compassionate they are. So that any kind of dualism is problematic. But I feel like if we are, in some sense, when the human mind doesn't know itself, we create all this suffering and destruction of just every conceivable kind, mm-hmm. Then our karmic challenge at the moment as a species is to wake up. All of us, the human beings, wake up, and actually to develop a kind of agreements or a kind of Dharma understanding that is lawful. Like the word Dharma means lawfulness. The word Tao means a sort of law of the universe. We need to create laws, I would say, that minimize aggression, violence, harming, whether it's the people or other species or nature or the planet, and maximize beauty and goodness and well-being and love. And I believe that human beings are capable of that. But so far, if you look at history, it's periodic episodes of we're all friends and then we get violent. And then we're all friends and then we get violent. And then we're all friends. But every time we get violent, we have more powerful weapons of destruction and mass destruction. And, you know, any doctor diagnosing that condition would say, this is really scary. This is worse than cancer, worse than a heart attack. We need to wake up and take care of what's deepest and best and healthiest in us human beings. And I think the Dharma, I don't think this, I know that the Dharma, the contribution of the entire Dharma wave or traditions over the past 2,600 years has a very, very important role to play in this. Not as Buddhism, but as something universal that really is true for all beings, not just people who self-identify for either cultural reasons or out of, you know, the traditions of origin as Buddhists, but that we all need to wake up to our Buddha nature while there's still time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that there are a million different, infinite number of ways of engaging in that, so that, you know, I like to say that at this particular moment in time, it's like we need all hands on spaceship Earth. We need everybody to, in some sense, wake up to their true nature and find out what their true calling is and contribute that to the world. And therefore, we need to change our laws, right, which is very difficult to do. But I mean the secular laws, so that we don't, you know, always emphasize our violent nature, but we need to, in some sense, contain that violent nature because we all have it potentially, but contain it with laws so that we can't tip things over into levels of destruction that are so horrific. I don't know whether we are capable of that, but I feel like that's what we need, is to, you know, bring wisdom into our politics and into our economics. And I know His Holiness has had meetings in Dharamsala, Mind and Life meetings, about, you know, sort of Dharma economics, you know, sort of neuroeconomics, they call it, or whatever, but to really begin to realize how to reframe our agreements, our lawful agreements in the sense of Dharma or Tao, so that we can actually protect what's most beautiful about our own nature as wakeful, potentially awake beings.
Right, yeah. So do you believe in this Pure Land, or do you think if you die, it will be just blank out? Or do you think there's really some place to go? Or you don't care?
I don't think there's any place to go. I like the quote from the Heart Sutra a lot. You know, there's no place to go, nothing to do, nothing to attain, because everything's already here. So all we need in some sense is to wake up, and then everything else will be second order kind of. Yes, we do need to restructure a lot of our, you know, understanding. But the really most important thing is, so of course I care. I care as much as I think it's possible to care. And then, but I really feel like it's very important that we not try to find, as we've done in the past, one or two leaders, famous people who say, this is our savior, whether it's the Dalai Lama, whether it's Mother Teresa, or whether it's George Washington, or you know, Ho Chi Minh, or whoever, you know, in whatever culture. We need wakefulness to be and compassion to become a distributive function that all of us are cultivating, and that we're all cells of the one body politic of the planet. So You can't have a healthy body if you have unhealthy cells that are not getting enough blood supply. So if you just take it from an economic perspective, let's say money is like blood. So many people don't have enough money. They can't live. They can't really do the best they can for their children. They can't even get good health care. That kind of poverty in an age of so much wealth is obscene. I mean, it's really a form of violence and ignorance. So we need to wake up to that and to make sure that all beings, all human beings, have an adequate blood supply. That means a money supply, so that they can live lives of dignity and caring and meaning and take care of their children and take care of their world, their society, their communities. There's enough energy, there's enough money, there's enough wisdom in the world to actually do that now. But there's a very strong attachment to capitalism, to, particular kind of philosophies that are really greed driven. So greed becomes a major object of meditative awareness or of compassion, because what is the point of greed where it just creates endless suffering? That doesn't mean that we can't make wonderful things happen. And yes, money is necessary and wealth might be necessary to generate some kinds of things, but that's where the wealth of nations somehow comes into it, that we need all nations to rise to a certain level of taking care of not just our people, but our environment, of our cities, of our countryside, in such a way that we're promoting well-being, kindness, compassion, wakefulness, and minimizing that impulse that we all have to focus on ourselves, to more for me, be driven by greed, hatred, and delusion. Right. And I think that's possible. That's what floats my boat. That's what keeps me going. And I've seen it happen in people over and over again. And usually they wake up when the suffering becomes enormous. So, even, people who have everything, highly privileged people, will wake up to the fact that they've maybe been much more selfish than they need to be, but they don't wake up until they are looking death in the eye, or they have some kind of major failure, and then they realize they've been living a fiction or a fantasy or a lie for long periods of time. And that, this is all part of in some sense, the moving of Dharma into the world in ways that are infinite. Okay. And therefore, all of us, anybody who loves the Dharma and is out there in some sense offering it to other people, where it's authentically grounded in his or her own traditions and experience and everything else, that we're taking care of the body politic. We're taking care of all the cells of the body of the human species. And I can't, if I could think of something more important to do, I'd do that. But in my, all my years, I have not come up with anything that remotely approaches the wisdom that I've found in the Dharma.